Hey everybody, it is July 20th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to.
Moshe, I know that you ducked out of work a little bit early on Wednesday to go see a movie. Tell us everything.
It was homework, Jill. It was all for work's sake. I actually went to go see Sound of Freedom Wednesday. It's a movie that has been much talked about. It's the child trafficking movie based on a true story. And it has gotten a lot of coverage of late. We have gotten a lot of questions about it. And I was like, well, I have to see this film so I can get my own eyes on it and then help folks with a fact check. And I know tomorrow we'll spend a bit of time talking about the big premieres this weekend of Oppenheimer and Barbie, which the movie industry is depending on, really, on what has been a subpar summer, given the lack of success of films like Indiana Jones and Mission Impossible. Interestingly, Sound of Freedom has been sort of a breakout, unexpected hit and has been very politically divisive. We'll say, just given the subject matter, very serious, talking about child trafficking, deals with some very serious issues. And so we'll dive into that tomorrow over on Instagram as well as on this podcast.
Well, I look forward to talking about Barbenheimer, as they're calling it. The combo Barbie, Oppenheimer. It should be a crazy opening weekend.
Yeah, and I know that there's a number of people who are buying tickets to both, and it might actually already be sold out at some theaters near you.
All right, we've actually got tons of news to get to. Here are the headlines. The police in Alabama speaking out about the woman who went missing last week. She got national attention, but now they're hinting that the entire thing was a hoax. 3 years after the pandemic started, we still don't know where exactly COVID actually came from, but now the Biden administration is suspending further funding at that Wuhan lab. Also in D.C., some members of Congress released a new proposal to ban lawmakers and members of the executive branch from owning stock. And another bill, this one to ban infant loungers like boppies. On to the hazing scandal at Northwestern University. 4 more former football players now say that they underwent ritualized sexual hazing. We've also been talking about record heat all week long, and here's something that we didn't expect. People are heading to one of the hottest places on Earth just to experience it. So not despite the heat, because of the heat.
Jill, we might have some new candidates for the Darwin Awards, if you're familiar with those.
All right, is Kim Kardashian's apparel line ready to go public? And how the writer's strike is impacting some of our favorite Netflix shows. Plus, Moshe has on this day in history.
The clue today, Jill, is the eagle has landed.
Okay, let's start with that huge follow-up to the story of the missing Alabama woman that we first told you about on Instagram over the weekend and then on this podcast Monday. So we mentioned it seemed too good to be true, and that might be the case. A 25-year-old nursing student named Carlee Russell went missing off of an Alabama interstate Thursday night after calling 911 to report a toddler walking alongside the highway. She returned home Saturday night claiming that she had been kidnapped, but managed to escape after 48 hours. Well, local police in Hoover, Alabama, where she is from, announced on Wednesday that the whole thing might have been a hoax. All right, let's start here with some of her claims. She told police last Thursday night after seeing a young child walking on the interstate and calling 911 that she was abducted and taken by a male with orange hair and also a woman. Russell told them that she was forced into an 18-wheeler truck and taken to a home where the man and woman told her to get undressed, then took photos of her. However, she never saw the female, only heard her voice. Russell also told police she managed to escape her abductors on Saturday somewhere in West Hoover and then made it home by foot. But police had said all along that there were no other reports of a toddler strolling down the interstate, nor were they able to corroborate any of her other claims. She provided one interview, but has not made herself available for follow-ups. And here's a bit from the Hoover Police Chief, Nicholas Dursis, on Wednesday.
We've asked to interview Carlee a second time, but have not been granted that request. As you can see, there are many questions left to be answered, but only Carlee can provide those answers. What we can say is that we've been unable to verify most of Carlee's initial statement made to investigators, and we have no reason to believe that there is a threat to the public safety related to this particular case.
All right, Jill, that was the police chief, and this is a bit of what they found. They said that investigators, with the help of the U.S. Secret Service, analyzed Russell's cell phone. Unclear whether she handed it over to them or they did this as part of the investigation. And so they went through her text messages and searches leading up to her disappearance and the day she vanished. Some of the searches that she did in the 48 hours and day of her disappearance include the following. July 11th, a search for, do you have to pay for an Amber Alert? On the day of her disappearance, on Thursday, a search for a one-way bus ticket from Birmingham to Nashville. Same day, a search for how to take money from a cash register without getting caught. And then here's the kicker. Also, she searched for the movie Taken, which is a movie starring Liam Neeson about abduction. Again, just a couple hours before she allegedly was kidnapped herself. Police, as you noted, said they did not locate any evidence of a toddler walking down the interstate. There were no additional 911 calls related to that, and they don't believe any toddler is missing. Detectives also said that before getting on the highway, they found that Russell had gone to a Target to purchase a whole bunch of snacks. And you might recall that when they found her abandoned car, that she had left some stuff behind, but apparently she was able to take the snacks she bought at Target with her wherever she went. Which is leading to a lot of questions, Jill, including, can she be charged with any crimes here for leading the local police, the feds, on a chase here and basically wasting taxpayer resources, ostensibly here, if you are not to believe her claims, on a search for her? As far as criminal charges related to her disappearance, Durzis says, right now our focus is to determine those 49 hours and where she was and what she was up to. So that investigation continues. Notably, Jill, when she returned to her parents on Saturday night, the parents, who had been very outspoken doing national TV interviews, did a follow-up interview earlier this week after she came home, backing up their daughter's claims that she was kidnapped and continuing to, effectively soak in the media attention here related to her disappearance. Jill, one thing that came up on our Monday Night Live, where we took questions on Instagram Monday night, is people started comparing this to Jussie Smollett. That was the alleged attack on an actor, Jussie Smollett, in Chicago in negative 25 wind chill in the middle of the night by two alleged MAGA Trump supporters in a discriminatory act because he was gay and black. And so you heard those initial allegations. He actually received some backup from some friends and colleagues in Hollywood. But very quickly, that story began to unravel as well, why was he at a Subway restaurant at 2:30 in the morning on one of the coldest nights in Chicago? And why were there also two Trump supporters wearing MAGA hats who knew his name? Oh, and also they had a rope for an effective kind of lynch attack that they'd put around his neck. Anyway, he actually went on trial and was charged for misleading Chicago PD on that. It's unclear here what will become of Carlee Russell and these allegations, whether they'll actually go forth with any sort of charges or just sort of let it go. It appears, at least at this point, Jill, that, there might have been a mental health thing here. Unclear. Either way, a lot of people, when you go through the comments on our posts on Instagram, feel, generally misled. They say, we were out there, trying to, call attention to a kidnapping here. And, we deserve an explanation from Carlee Russell as to what exactly happened here. And right now, as we said on Monday and still today, there appear to be more questions than answers.
Especially, the media gets a lot of flack, and rightfully so, for not always focusing on Black victims of kidnapping and crime and putting so much attention into victims if they are white and have certain kind of characteristics.
Jill, it was something that when I was at CBS News that we, thought about, because there was the reputation, the infamous reputation, that the media only cares about pretty white girls. And it was clear in this case that, it appears at this point, the media started to learn its lesson of sorts and said, this is the case that we should cover. And in this scenario, it appears that, everyone sort of feels misled here, which is concerning to folks who say, the next time there's a missing person, will authorities take it seriously? Will people on social media take it seriously? And will the national media take it seriously?
All right, on to our next story. The Biden administration has suspended funding for 10 years for the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That is the Chinese research lab at the center of a debate over the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. So this is the lab that some believe the COVID-19 virus was developed and escaped from in late 2019, which of course triggered the global pandemic that has killed about 7 million people across the globe, including about 1 million people here in the United States. U.S. intelligence have not yet collectively determined where the virus came from. Some U.S. agencies say they have evidence that it came from the lab. There are other theories that it developed naturally and spread from a nearby seafood market. Yes, exactly. Now, according to a new memo from the Department of Health and Human Services, this ban on funding to the Wuhan lab follows a months-long review that found the lab is, quote, not compliant with federal regulations and is not presently responsible. HHS had requested documents and notebooks because of their safety concerns at the lab, and the lab just didn't provide them. So now a spokesperson for HHS says the action is meant to ensure that the lab does not receive another dollar of federal funding, and concerns that the lab violated NIH's biosafety protocols. The HHS says the lab has not received federal funding from the U.S. National Institutes of Health since July of 2020. And the lab now has about 30 days to respond to this notice. Interestingly, though, the pandemic started in March of 2020, at least here in the United States. So certainly it caught my eye that the Wuhan lab was getting federal funding from the U.S. For months after the pandemic started.
Yeah, and that's during the Trump administration, though those were the first few months, Jill, when they were very much, pushing the wet market theory and really trying to knock down the idea that it did come from this research lab. So officials over at the U.S. National Institutes of Health have repeatedly asserted that U.S. taxpayer dollars were not used in any lab research that could have produced the pandemic. Though, Jill, at the same time, including in this most recent release, they basically admit they didn't know everything that was going on at the Wuhan Institute. So it's hard to corroborate those two things, being like, we can assure you that no U.S. taxpayer money went towards the development of COVID-19, and yet at the same time admit, well, but we actually don't really know everything that was going on behind closed doors there. Just to take us back a little bit, the National Institutes of Health back in 2014 gave a grant to the EcoHealth Alliance, that's a US-based organization, that then partially funneled funds to the Wuhan Institute. Over 6 years, between 2014 and 2020, just over $2 million went to the Wuhan lab. And we should note this is not abnormal. The National Institutes of Health has thousands of grants out there for research across the US and around the world in the billions of dollars. Wuhan was one of the locations. The US is always looking for new data, new research, leverage good researchers, both domestically and around the world, to help, develop new medications and conduct a whole bunch of research out there. And at the time, there was an effort by American scientists to collaborate with Chinese scientists and engage with researchers there and around the world to better understand animal viruses in their regions that could pose a risk to humans. We've known for a very long time, going back to the Spanish flu, going back to the plague, that, some of these pandemics can occur. And so we've been trying to get ahead of them through research. And so over in Wuhan, they were studying bat coronaviruses. You might remember the whole idea that this may have come from a bat. And that was the focus of some of the research happening there. And in the aftermath of COVID, the US and everyone else around the world, the World Health Organization, others have been asking to get inside the Wuhan lab to, figure out if something went awry there. China has been blocking international scientists from freely exploring that hypothesis, hampering research that could shed light on the outbreak that has changed all of our lives, 9 billion people around the world for the last 3 years. So you have the World Health Organization trying to get in there. We're trying to get in there. Jill, you mentioned the U.S. intelligence community is split on the origins of COVID. Just a reminder for those of you keeping score at home, the Energy Department and the FBI are the two agencies in the U.S. government that believe with some reliability that a lab leak might have caused COVID-19. Then you have the National Intelligence Council and 4 other intelligence bodies that actually ascribe to the natural transmission, the wet market theory. And then you have the CIA, which won't make an assessment on any of these with even a low level of confidence. Keep in mind, the U.S. intelligence world includes about 20 plus agencies. And so those are just a few of them, and they're still all split on this. And with no sign anytime soon that we'll get inside Wuhan, and now the fact that we're going to be cutting any sort of research funding from the U.S. government, don't expect to resolve that anytime soon.
But Moshe, I think you hit the nail on the head here in terms of why this still matters. We don't know where COVID came from. I mean, it's just wild that 3 years plus after the pandemic started, how many lives lost, how many lives changed and just upended. And we really don't have any answers. And it's not just, okay, we need to know. It's so that it doesn't happen again. And that is the frustration here. You and I, it's reviewed Josh Rogan, who is a Washington Post columnist and literally wrote the book on China. And he just had some great insights into the lab leak theory. We will put a link to that podcast in the show notes.
Jill, I was trying to think about like some of the biggest mysteries of the last century where, there are theories, but people aren't convinced. That includes like who killed John F. Kennedy, right? Lee Harvey Oswald, was he aided by somebody? I'm trying to think of other theories out there that are up there. But in terms of like huge, cataclysmic, like historical events and the fact that we don't know how this started, and we probably won't conclusively, is got to be extremely frustrating. And we wanted to make a point today of bringing you this Wuhan lab story just because it caught our attention and you might not see it everywhere.
All right, time now for the speed read from the Wall Street Journal. 2 U.S. senators are set this week to introduce bipartisan legislation to bar members of the federal executive branch and lawmakers from owning stock in individual companies. New polling shows broad public support for such a measure. The bill comes from Senators Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat from New York, and Josh Hawley, a Republican from Missouri.
Jill, those two don't agree on much, but they do agree on this, it appears.
Not often that you see them co-sponsoring anything together. But this bill would permit the president, vice president, lawmakers, Capitol Hill aides, et cetera, to own mutual funds or just broad industry and index funds, but they would not be able to own stocks in individual companies, even in blind trusts.
Yeah, we reported on this a lot. Lawmakers and their aides are currently permitted to own and trade individual stocks as long as they don't make investment decisions based on non-public information they learn from their jobs in Congress. But Jill, that is very hard to police. And so there have been a dozen bills so far in just the past few months that are all versions of a ban on stock trading. I mean, some members of Congress, Jill, are making millions of dollars a year, and suddenly knowing when to trade certain company stocks days before those companies are investigated, or other things come up at congressional hearings, and certainly makes people go, I wonder how they knew that. And so there was a huge investigation, a series done by the Wall Street Journal last year that found that many top folks on Capitol Hill, as well as executive branch employees, own stocks in companies that their agencies actually help regulate. Now, there is a law in place that went into effect during the Obama administration called the Stock Act. It was actually highly touted. I remember I was at CBS at the time. There was a huge 60 Minutes piece about it, and it was going to clamp down on this. And effectively what it does is ban members from making money from trading on non-public or material information they receive as part of their jobs. Jill, if you do that or you don't follow those rules, the fine is $200, which a number of members have been more than happy to pay, given how much they've profited. So that has been pretty ineffective, which is leading to this latest round of we need to ratchet this up. Now, there are members of Congress, including Tommy Tuberville, who we talked about last week on the podcast. He's like, I should be able to make a living by trading here. And there's certainly other members who agree with him, though there has been this public outcry over the profiteering, especially on COVID matters, the amount that was made off of certain pharma companies. What did the members of Congress know about vaccines and that sort of thing in advance? There was also recent, Jill, a New York Times analysis done last year that found that over a 3-year period, more than 3,700 trades reported by more than 100 lawmakers from both parties, Republicans and Democrats, posed potential conflicts between public responsibilities and private finances. And that just ended in 2021, that investigation. But there are various Twitter accounts and social media accounts that are tracking this stuff all the time and finding, again, very questionable trades, making you wonder how they knew to trade that stock or buy that company or sell that company in the time that they did. You mentioned polling on this. Pretty popular with Democrats and Republicans across the country. There was a poll released by the University of Maryland this week that found that 80% of voters support a ban on stock ownership by members of Congress, the president, the VP, the Supreme Court, and all of their families.
I think there is a real question on whether this is actually going to pass, given that these lawmakers have a lot to lose financially from it. Staying on Capitol Hill, 2 members of Congress also calling on the federal government to take action on pillow-like infant loungers. It was revealed that there have been significantly more deaths linked to the products than officials previously announced. In a letter sent to the Consumer Product Safety Commission on Friday, Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat from Connecticut, and Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, a Democrat from Illinois, they described these loungers as unnecessary products that endangered infants' lives. At least 25 deaths have been linked to baby loungers since 2015. Just about 2 years ago, in September of 2021, the federal government recalled more than 3 million infant loungers manufactured by the Boppy Company, citing 8 deaths of infants who had reportedly suffocated after being placed on the product.
But even after that recall, deaths continued both in the Boppy newborn lounger and those sold by other manufacturers. That's according to a recent NBC News investigation. Newborns can suffocate on the surface of the loungers or asphyxiate when their bodies get stuck in a position that restricts breathing. Boppy and other manufacturers have said their loungers were never intended for sleep. They've warned consumers on the label saying don't leave your babies unattended in these items. That said, it appears Congress is looking to ban it regardless of those warnings.
From the New York Times, at least 2 people were killed and several others injured after a gunman stormed a building under construction with a shotgun in the New Zealand city of Auckland early Thursday, hours before the first soccer match of the Women's World Cup was scheduled to start nearby. The gunman was also killed. The New Zealand police began receiving reports of a person firing a gun inside of the construction site at about 7:20 local time. The police said an armed man had entered the high-rise building. It was occupied by dozens of construction workers and went floor by floor while shooting. New Zealand's prime minister said at a news conference that the shooter was armed with a pump-action shotgun and that it appears that he was acting alone.
Yeah, this is morning rush hour in New Zealand. A number of passersby and commuters heard the volley of gunshots. Armed police officers and vehicles swarmed the area. Authorities shut down parts of the city, which again is playing host to the Women's World Cup. So there's a lot of precautions and a lot of concern around the games. It was occurring just as New Zealand was about to face off with Norway at a stadium about 3 miles from the shooting. Several World Cup teams and many fans are staying in that area where the shooting occurred, including the U.S. team, which will play its first game against Vietnam just later this week. In New Zealand, we should remind folks, gun ownership is very low by comparison to the U.S. Actually, most countries are. Gun violence considered pretty rare. There have been a couple incidents of mass shootings, one in 1990, one in 1997, and then, of course, in 2019, when 51 people were killed in a mass shooting by a white supremacist in 2 mosques in the city of Christchurch. That's when days later, the prime minister of the country announced a temporary ban on most semi-automatic weapons. And then later that year, a sweeping nationwide ban on semi-automatic weapons went into effect. Again, the current prime minister, saying that this person used a pump action shotgun in this incident.
From NBC News, 4 additional former Northwestern football players came forward on Wednesday claiming that they were also subjected to, quote, extreme ritualized sexual hazing while at the prestigious Big Ten school. The new allegations came a day after the first lawsuit was filed by an anonymous former Wildcats player whose civil complaint went into excruciating detail about hazing carried out within Northwestern's football program. Former player Lloyd Yates, standing with 3 other former players, told reporters on Wednesday that the university and the football program has, quote, let us down. We were thrown into a culture where physical, emotional, and sexual abuse was normalized. We should note these players not yet part of any lawsuits. Longtime Northwestern football coach Pat Fitzgerald was fired last week amid allegations that he did nothing to prevent the hazing.
Yeah, there are already lawsuits that have been filed, Jill, and probably more to come. The players and their attorneys described many of the same acts outlined in a John Doe lawsuit filed in Chicago on Tuesday by a couple attorneys, including alleged rituals that involved what's called a naked human car wash in the shower and a punishment called Shrek claps. That's where upperclassmen in the team would run around a player who made a mistake in practice while clapping their hands above the head of the teammate. Jill, there are a litany of claims here made when it comes to hazing. And by the way, those attorneys say that it's not limited to the football team, that they say that volleyball, cheerleading, there's a number of Northwestern sports where they believe the culture of hazing did exist. Attorney Ben Crump, you might be familiar with him. He's certainly outspoken on a number of cases. He's representing the four named Northwestern players. He said that he hopes this scandal, which has rocked Northwestern University, will have a greater impact throughout college sports. Jill, I heard from one university administrator in the Mo News community today who said that all these years they've been going after fraternities, sororities, and they've been waiting for them to go after the sports teams because apparently it's a very not well-kept secret on some college campuses.
All right, we've been talking all week about this record heat. Here is an unexpected twist from CBS News. One of the hottest places on Earth is drawing more visitors this week, not in spite of near record high temperatures, but because of them. Tourists are flocking to Death Valley National Park, a narrow 282-foot basin on the California-Nevada border, to experience how the triple-digit temperatures feel against their skin. Death Valley is home to Furnace Creek.
Really?
An unincorporated community that includes a visitor center and an outdoor digital thermometer. So dozens of people have been gathering at the temperature reading in recent days, some wearing fur coats, apparently as an ironic joke, to experience the heat and snap a picture to impress family and friends on social media. The things we do
Jill,
for social media.
Jill, if we start suffering for likes over on the Mo News Instagram feed, I may head over there just for some shares and some likes. I don't care what you people say.
I'm a good employee, but I'm not doing... I'm a good employee, Moshe, but I'm not
Jill,
taking that assignment.
With Mission Impossible in theaters, I have a mission if you choose to accept it.
My husband would be like, what is Moshe doing over there? What kind of racket is this?
It sort of goes against everything we stand for at the Mo News brand. Like, you went to Death Valley
wearing
for the
a fur coat.
So apparently on people, come on. By the way, if any of you listen to us on this podcast and you did this, like, I don't know you. I don't understand you, but I would like you to message me because I want to interview you because I really want to understand you and why you do. Why are you, to quote The Office, why are you the way you are? So Death Valley on Sunday reached 128 degrees Fahrenheit. That's without the heat index, Jill. That's just the temperature. That's 7 degrees shy of the highest temperature ever recorded on Earth, which incidentally is in Death Valley about 100 years ago, though that number is in dispute. They're not sure whether the thermometer was working back then in the 19-teens back then. So Death Valley is situated below sea level, but is nestled among steep mountain ranges, which is what leads to this super heated environment there. And so it's known as Death Valley for a reason. It has these brutal temperatures. Jill, some locals are like, what are you guys even thinking? I mean, my first thought when you brought up this story, I'm like, you better hope to God that your car will not fail you on that route, because your car breaks down, you lose AC, like in a matter of minutes, it will become very, very, very inhospitable. And I would also imagine if you make this trip, you better have just so much water with you. Again, for that scenario that like something goes wrong. Like, why risk it? And by the way, I feel for the first responders. Like, if you're a first responder in that area, first of all, it's not LA, right? It's Death Valley. So it's not like there's a whole bunch of hospitals and like emergency workers. Do you save these people, the heat tourists, or do we just like give them up?
Hopefully it won't come to that.
Oh, Jill, you know it will. You know it will. It's like come on, people. Like, give our first responders a break. They really need to be saving all of you so you can take that selfie for a few likes on your social media account. I know I'm not supposed to opine, but that one really got to me.
I think the reason that it's bothering you, and me as well, is because people underestimate how dangerous the heat is. I don't think people actually take it seriously, but it is, as we've reported, the top weather-related cause of death.
Let me tell you how it's going to feel on your skin. Hot. Really freaking hot.
Okay, from Axios, Kim Kardashian's apparel brand Skims is 4 years old and worth $4 billion. Kardashian, who is the company's biggest shareholder, is already a billionaire. She created a number of successful ventures. Skims raised $270 million at its new valuation in a funding round led by Wellington Management. The company says its viral following and growth is what drew in investors. Skims started as a shapewear brand, but it expanded into swimwear and loungewear and plans to launch men's clothing in the fall.
Yeah, Jill, you mentioned Wellington Management. That caught a lot of interest because they've helped take companies public, which means you could be buying Skims stock at some point in the near future. Though they haven't been very specific about whether they would create an initial public offering, an IPO, and sell shares, but that certainly appears to be the direction they're going in. In the last year, 11 million people around the world have joined waitlists for popular Skims products. About 70% of their customers are Gen Zers or millennials, so they keep it young. Sales right now are projected to be $750 million this year. It was only $500 million last year. Could soon approach $1 billion. It's online right now, but they will be opening brick and mortar retail stores very soon, and so we'll see where this goes. But the Kardashian empire, Jill, I think at least one of her other sisters is Kylie, I believe, is also a billionaire now off of her cosmetic brands. And so it looks like, Kim's there and continuing, the numbers keep going up for her with the success of Skims.
From The Verge, in a totally shocking turn of events, Netflix subscriptions have gone up after their password sharing crackdown. In its second quarter earnings report out on Wednesday, the streamer says it saw an additional 5.9 million subscribers around the globe, with the US and Canada making up about 1.17 million new members. That is from April to June. So now Netflix is going to start to crack down on password sharing in all of its remaining countries.
Jill, that headline comes as Netflix also announced that they're eliminating one of their ad-free tiers, the $9.99 tier. Translation, if you want to watch Netflix without sitting through ads, it'll soon cost you $15.49 a month. This all comes, by the way, as we've been talking about the writer's strike, the Screen Actors Guild strike. Going through the numbers, Netflix says it will have about $1.5 billion extra dollars because of the strike, money that they were going to spend towards production that right now is sitting. So that's the good news for them. At the same time, the longer the strike goes on, the less content that they'll have to push out, less new content. So shows like Stranger Things, Big Mouth, Emily in Paris, The Sandman, all have halted production as they're looking to write, produce, and roll out new seasons. All right, Jill, now time for On This Day in History. On this July 20th, we're going to stick to the 20th century. We're not going to go too far back today. Starting in 1944, on this day, it was the height of World War II. On this day, German military leaders attempted to assassinate Adolf Hitler at his military retreat, the Wolf's Lair. It came after a failed plot to kill him on his plane. There are actually several plots. This is the one that got closest to him. On July 20th, 1944, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed one of two planned bombs in a briefcase under a table Hitler was having a meeting at. He actually planned to have two suitcase bombs, but was unable to arm the second bomb in time. So Stauffenberg leaves the room, leaves the briefcase with a bomb in it under the table. Incidentally, that briefcase is pushed under a heavy support leg of the table. It detonates, fails to kill Hitler. Hitler would announce quickly he's okay. Stauffenberg actually thought it was successful initially and immediately start to take out the plotters. The motivations of the plotters remain contested to this day. Some were objecting to the Holocaust, the murder of the 6 million Jews and others, but mainly for most of these guys, it was Hitler's mismanagement of the war. By then, the US was on the march, Russia was on the march, and they wanted to rescue Germany from a catastrophic defeat, and they felt that Hitler at that time was increasingly irrational in how he was managing the war. All right, on this day in history in 1968, the first Special Olympics began. They were held in Chicago at Soldier Field with about 1,000 athletes. Just 1 year later, and this is probably what this date is most known for, July 20th, 1969, history made on the moon. Jill, at 4:17 p.m. Eastern, we heard the first iconic quote from Neil Armstrong: "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Then, just a few hours later, after about 7 hours on the moon, at 10:56 p.m. Eastern Time, Neil Armstrong became the first person to walk on the surface of the moon. Let's take a listen real quick to some of the CBS News coverage that night.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon on this July 20th, 1969.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So they've estimated that 650 million people around the world were watching at that moment, which was effectively 20% of the global population. TVs, of course, were still not available widespread in many countries at that time, but 1/5 of humanity watched those events live.
Incredible that about 50 years later, we're now trying to make our way back there.
Yeah, we could be replaying those images in HD in just the next couple of years if NASA is able to make good on its plans right now, Jill. Some other space history, actually, on this day in 1976, the Viking 1 lander, the first ever successful landing on Mars, this was unmanned, of course, touched down. And of course, that's the reason why we're going back to the moon, is to be able to get to Mars, to build a base on the moon that will let us launch to Mars. And that's the goal in the next couple of years. By the way, one of the other reasons we're going back to the moon, we want to put a woman on the moon. We want to put someone of color on the moon. And so that's part of the plan here in the next couple of years. Finally, we end with a bit of music history. On this day, 58 years ago, Bob Dylan released his hit, Like a Rolling Stone.
Moshe, I don't even know what to say because you kept all of your on this day references within about a 30-year span. Usually you're spanning centuries.
Jill, I don't know what to say. I mean, I feel like I may have missed on some good 16th, 17th, and 18th century history, but listen, really a couple interesting events there in the 40s, 60s, and 70s.
I'm here for it. You know, I love space history, especially anything related to the Apollo mission. All right, that is a wrap. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us in the App Store so we can continue to grow.
And thanks to all of you who've been joining Mo News Premium. We're running a special right now with the code Mo News Trial, one word, Mo News Trial, over at mo.news. You can get a free first month on the monthly subscription to check out what we're doing over there on the Premium Pod and the Premium Instagram account. We've been having a really interesting discussion this week when it comes to third-party candidates and whether America is ready for a real third party. Again, you can head over to mo.news for access to our extra content, as well as just a way to support what we're doing here at Mo News. So appreciate all of you who have joined or consider joining.
All right, thanks everyone.